We have started.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Alpine's September edition of our music-themed webinar series. Today, we are going to be talking about unlocking the future of warehouse associates by optimizing LMS and WMS for success. The disclaimer at the bottom, the information discussed in this session represents the views of the individuals and does not constitute legal advice. You should consult with your organization's leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situations. All right, we do have poll questions today that we are putting out there that we are looking for your feedback on. And our esteemed colleague, Dave Krazine, is, I think, put the poll up there. So if you would answer those 3 questions, we will go over the results at the end of the webinar. All right, so a little bit about your presenters. My name is Jim Chamberlain. I'm Senior Managing Director at Alpine Supply Chain Solutions. My background, 33 years in supply chain logistics. I'm an industrial engineer by schooling and training. A lot of experience rolling out labor management systems and working a lot with different types of WMSs, making enhancements to homegrown systems, as well as evaluating and helping to implement existing Tier 1 WMSs. So I'm going to turn it over to John for his intro.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Seidel. I'm with TZA. And, when Jim said he'd been doing this for 33 years, I was thinking how old he was until I realized I've been doing it for 40. So, yeah, I guess that just brings some experience to the conversation. My role at TZA is to help them work with their partner network and organizations like Alpine as we try to bring value to our clients in the world of labor management.
All right, so today's topic, we are going to be looking at 3 different areas. We want to define success, what your WMS and LMS solutions need to do to meet expectations, determine whether you need to upgrade your solutions or completely replace them, and then finally, tips for selecting and implementing a joint LMS and WMS solution. And during today's presentation, please use the chat icon at the bottom of the screen to submit questions, or I believe there's also the raise hand button, and we will answer your questions throughout the presentation.
We also have the Q&A going too.
So I'm going to take us through the next handful of slides and really try to help set a little bit of context, before we kind of explore what to do about it. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we see in the clients that we're working with out there in the marketplace. And some of these challenges are the result of WMS issues. Some of them are the result of operational challenges. Some of them are LMS related. But really, when you kind of look at the root cause of what's driving people to seek out a best-in-class WMS or LMS solution, it's that they're not able to meet their own expectations. They're not able to meet the expectations of their customers. So they're having problems with inventory accuracy. They're having problems getting orders out the door on time or accurately. And then from a labor standpoint, really a host of different issues, right? A lack of labor availability, getting the qualified people they need to work, the productivity of the associates once they have them, the ability to hang on to those employees and not suffer from high rates of turnover. And then finally, really high labor costs overall, which we'll talk about in a little more detail here in a second. Now, and what's causing these challenges? It really comes down a lot to old, obsolete systems that have been in place for years, if not decades, and even newer systems where the operation is failing to take full advantage of the capability that those solutions have resident in the version that they have in production, but they just aren't properly trained to fully utilize the solutions. And yeah, next to that, I think, is employee engagement, really the ownership of the operating culture for that facility, from the associates all the way to the senior executives, needs to be consistent, and of a really a performance mindset needs to be in place in order to eliminate those challenges and meet expectations. And often as not, that culture is defined by the labor management program. So if the labor management program, and I'll make a distinction here between a labor management system, which is the tool utilized to plan and manage labor and report on labor, et cetera, versus the labor management program, which is the overall strategy for managing all of the associates across all levels within the facility. If that program is underperforming, that'll lead to some of the challenges above. Jim, anything you want to add, or you can take us to the next slide?
Yeah, one thing I did want to touch on was the weak employee engagement. Counterintuitively, when you have a labor management program in place, we see engagement go up. Employees as well as supervisors are engaged in more feedback. The voice of the employee is heard more because there's an accountability chain that gets established within a labor management program, meaning that when an employee says, these are the things that are keeping me from being successful, it's the frontline supervisor's responsibility to address those issues so that the team on the floor can be successful. And it really fosters a continual improvement culture. And like I mentioned, we really see engagement go up, which is something that I don't think people actually pair to a labor management environment.
No, it's a good call. So go ahead and build this slide a little bit, right? So this first statement may be seen as a little bit controversial, but I think it's actually very important, and in my experience has proven to be true over and over again, that the two most important software applications in your warehouse are the WMS and the LMS. And I'm sure there are OMS vendors or transportation vendors or control system vendors who may take exception with that statement. But if those two applications aren't working the way they're designed to function, you're never going to meet the expectations of the employees or your customers. You know, secondarily, 60% of your operating costs on average are labor. So if you're going to spend that much of your budget on your people, you better be getting what you need from them and creating a work environment and work experience for them so that they enjoy the work they're doing. They feel fairly compensated. They recognize opportunities for advancement and skill development. And, you know, a happy workforce when you're spending 60% of your money is absolutely critical. Go ahead. Next one. This, you know, the WMS, without a well-utilized WMS and the operational discipline and systemic discipline driven by the WMS, you're going to run into problems with inventory accuracy. And then as soon as you run into inventory accuracy problems, you'll have trouble filling your orders. And guess what? Then you'll disappoint your customers. So yeah, the WMS strategy is really kind of an inventory first mindset and then task execution on a timely and accurate basis. Go ahead, last bullet. And then the counterpoint to that is the LMS strategy. Without a well-executed LMS strategy or labor management program, as we were talking about before, you're going to inherently have inefficient operations because you're not utilizing standard operating procedures, you're not utilizing engineered standards, you're not engaging with the associates and providing them with the coaching they need to be successful. And as soon as you fail to do any of those things, you're going to struggle to meet the expectations again. Jim, anything you want to add, or should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, I did want to add one thing, that in the newer systems, you know, it's catering towards the younger generations, and gamification, you know, where you're introducing competition and fun and, you know, trying to tap into the associates' overall well-being is something that should not be overlooked and can really make a difference in your overall culture within your facility.
It's interesting in that we've found in talking to our prospects and our existing customers about ProTrack, our LMS, that while the ability to define and measure productivity is still kind of at the core of what an LMS is, the engagement at the team level, at the individual level, in addition to the coaching, that gamification element where we're using our production screens, which are really just TV screens that we're mounting in the various departments and in the break rooms, and displaying information about the top performers or employee birthdays or work anniversaries or other communication from corporate or HR that's relevant to that workforce. That's really appreciated. And it's interesting, as soon as we kind of pit this team versus that team, and the winning team gets to be first in line at the picnic, or they get to wear the red shirts next week, that gets to be almost as motivating as the incentive-based pay. It's interesting, the attitude of the 20-somethings in the workforce today, their desire to work with automation, their desire to be recognized for their contributions publicly, are almost as important as their desire to maximize their paycheck. Right, go ahead. So this slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the market, because it's evolving, and it's evolving fairly rapidly as more automation is finding its way into the distribution center. The current suppliers in this space, from a software perspective, they're calling out capabilities to try to differentiate themselves from each other. We talked about automation support, cost of ownership. That's really a reflection of these solutions migrating to the cloud. The advanced analytics that are offered both in an LMS or a WMS for understanding in real time what's going on in the operation is becoming strategically important to the customer base. And here, most recently, we're starting to see the introduction of AI and machine learning into these solutions. I think as you look into 2024 and beyond, we'll see more and more of this as we get into smart scheduling, as we get into the ability to tag performance to corrective actions and suggest how to optimize making our associates productive, and incorporating intelligence provided by other solutions like digital systems to maximize the productivity of indirect labor. We're going to see learning taking place there. So these solutions are all evolving. There is, I think, importance to look at software as a service so that you can have an active solution strategy. The providers in this space, they're all over the place, right? The big ERP guys have warehousing solutions. You've got the suite vendors that do all of the various solutions that are utilized in supply chain, and then you've got best-in-class component vendors like us at TZA. So there are a lot of different solution strategies as well as product offerings. Gartner follows the space. They put out a Magic Quadrant every year on the WMS vendors. And they believe the market is continuing to expand at really an amazing rate to me at 13%. So a lot of dynamic growth going on there, new entrants into the markets all the time. Jim, anything to add?
Yeah, the one piece that's really interesting now, the big buzz out there is AI. Anytime you're going to Google or look anything up, it's almost finishing your thoughts for you. There's a lot of AI out there now that can sit on top of your WMS and start to give the intelligence to the operation of where and when to execute within the four walls. So if you have an inbound trailer that's delayed, there can be signals to the WMS not to send those picks to the floor so that you can avoid excess work in process, excess handling, or even congestion. So much more intelligence is being introduced and added to the WMS offerings.
Good. So we're going to spend one slide talking about what's going on with kind of the WMS space, and one slide talking about what's going on in the LMS space. So in the WMS space, and you'll see, I added WES and WCS here because there's an interesting convergence going on between the control system space, the warehouse execution space, which is primarily the platform used to drive automation, and the traditional WMS space. It used to be that there were gaps in between these solution categories that you had to figure out how to fill through complicated integration work every time you did a project. These days, there's actually overlap between these capabilities, and it's more about sorting out where's the best solution to address the business requirements as well as the technical requirements of the solution strategy. So there's, pressure from being driven by the introduction of automation. There's being pressure on the WMS vendors and the control system vendors kind of sort out, how do I support the best in breed solution as it relates to automation? And how do I meet the business needs and transactional needs related to the traditional WMS space? Because, of course, the concept of operations is continuing to get more complex. On the inbound side, it's typical these days, especially in certain retail, or other vertical industries, to see fluid receiving, drop trailers, dynamic yard management, an inbound sortation plan where we've got automation driving, a QC function or inbound value-added services, work order processing, et cetera. And all of the control over what percentage is being sent to which destination, whether it's an interim destination or an end destination like an active pick face or reserve storage. That sort plan, that sophisticated logic to build that sort plan is being executed dynamically by the WMS based on the ASN and the known demand signals in the building to see whether or not something should be dynamically cross-docked, inspected, et cetera. So a lot of sophistication coming into what used to be a process where you brought the freight off the truck, you stacked it on a pallet, somebody scanned to the barcode, you put an orange cone on it to tell somebody to go put it away into the rack, right? That we're way past that these days in terms of what the systems support on an inbound standpoint, and creating a lot of flexibility for inventory utilization based on this, real-time visibility to that receipt. Next bullet. Same sort of thing is going on the outbound side. Here's where a lot of the advanced automation and robotics is being introduced. We've got all the goods to person solutions, all the shuttle systems. A lot of automation is being driven into the picking process. Well, that's great, but you need that WMS and LMS to optimize the human element and make sure that we're replenishing that automation and performing the downstream functions from that automation at the same pace that the automation can perform its picking activities in order to achieve the throughput desires and the accuracy that you need to make sure that your shipments are departing on time and 100% accurate. And then, as I said, aligning all of those outbound activities. So whether we're talking about cross-dock, non-conveyable processing, conveyable processing, unit picking, the use of automation, manual picks, and coordinating all of that, is being driven into the automation. In the old days, I can remember doing projects where you had a wave jockey, right, who was like the smartest guy in the building and sat up there and figured out how to close waves, how to release waves, when they should be released, how to prioritize various pick tasks in order to drive completion. In today's leading edge solutions, that process has been automated and maximizes the throughput of the outbound operation as a result. And finally, the last bullet, inventory control. Gone are the days of annual physical inventories. It's not difficult these days with a robust WMS to demonstrate to both your internal and external auditors that a dynamic cycle counting program can guarantee that you'll count the right quantities of inventory with the right frequency based on whatever criteria matter to your auditors, right? You can put programs in place that do exception-based counts, that do routine counts, that do scheduled counts, that can do counts based on value, counts based on expiration dates, lot numbers, et cetera. So the sophistication of the cycle counting process has continued to develop to the point where they're amazingly intelligent these days. And then, where do you spend a lot of your time? It's dealing with the exceptions. When something goes wrong and doesn't behave the way that you expected it to, whether it's an inventory challenge, an operator challenge, an automation challenge, that real-time visibility to those exceptions and being able to address them without impacting the shipping schedule is super important and fully supported by a combination of the WM and the LM. Jim, anything you want to add on this slide?
I think one thing, when we talk about WMS, WES, and WCS is with the modern WMSs and these systems, the hooks are already in place so that it allows you to scale your operations. And if you want to crawl, walk, run into more of an automated, mechanized solution, you can do that and have confidence that these systems are going to be able to effectively communicate with each other.
Yeah, it's a good call out. All right, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk for a minute on LMS and whether or not the LMS or really labor management program is meeting the needs of the business as enabled by the LMS. These days, labor planning, labor scheduling, and ongoing labor utilization is just as important as productivity. I need to have the right number of people with the right certified skills in my operation in order to perform today's work. So the leading LMS is capable of understanding the capabilities of your employees at the employee level. So when you're doing your planning for that day, we can look at the demand signals that we've received in the form of orders, look at the human performance capabilities, and decide exactly how many, not only how many, but which FTEs you want to have working on that shift in order to make sure that you're going to fulfill the obligations that you have as it relates to workload. And then the utilization comment is kind of the opposite, making sure that all of the associates you have on shift are fully occupied throughout the day and that you don't have gap time. You don't have somebody who's supposed to have a 45-minute lunch disappear for 90 minutes or a 15-minute break disappear for 25 minutes. With the heel-to-toe logic in the LMS, you can track every motion of those associates throughout the day and address any utilization questions in real time rather than after the fact. And it is a easy conversation to have with that associate because you have the exact data to say, all right, this is when you completed this task. This is when you did the next task. This is how long it should have taken you to do that task. This is how long it took. Help me understand what the challenges were that you were facing. Help me equip you to do better the next time kind of conversation, as opposed to, well, first you have to even know that they weren't back from break on time, right? You'd have to notice it. And then secondly, they can't just say, well, yeah, I was working, and you've got nothing to, have that. So those conversations are much harder. So the LMS meeting the needs of the business is having the right people with the right skills, with the right utilization to then drive accountability to their productivity throughout the day. You do this with engineered standards, you do it with an incentive-based PACE solution so that when Jim is working at 120% of expectations, he's sharing in the value of that contribution. And at the same time, if he's only working at 70% of what's expected of him, he's accountable for how to improve his performance and create a different outcome for himself and the organization. The observation of the LMS, observation capabilities in the LMS are real time. The coaching support is real time. You can recognize success and address challenges as they occur. And then finally, you've got very elaborate BI tools in the LM to allow you at the network level, at the facility level, at the functional level, at the team level, at the individual level, to understand exactly what's going on, at that moment in time and historically. We have customers that are utilizing their LM data in an existing facility to do planning for what they need in a future facility and understand, by looking at travel time, by looking at labor utilization, to question the design of that operation using the LM data so that they can build a more efficient facility the next time around. Go ahead, the next bullet. So you do all this, right? You've got happier associates, you've got a higher retention rate, which is a huge cost saver, right? Those employees that are engaged, developing new skills are going to be more productive. Jim touched on the gamification element of that. We think that's super important as well. We talked about the utilization and how important that is. And then finally, the last comment on this I would make is it inherently then is connected to your safety and compliance programs. When you have people following the standard operating procedures that are aligned with the engineered standards, you have a higher outcome in terms of safety rating. And it's easier to make sure that if you're in an environment where there's regulatory compliance required, that you're satisfying those requirements as well. Jim, any thoughts?
I do. Recognition choices over the years have changed. It always used to be dollars. You would incent and recognize people for overperforming by getting more dollars in their check. Now people are reaching out to the employee base and say, what's important to you? So we've seen gift cards, time off, trips. The things that we're learning is that one size does not fit all. And by tapping into that and understanding your workforce, that is going to help to make sure they're engaged and that they're contributing and giving all they have to the operation.
That's a great call out. The generations of today are dramatically different than when I was in my 20s. That's for sure. Next, if your LMS or your WMS is more than 7 years old, it's probably obsolete. And not only is it obsolete, it's probably not upgradable. It's probably in a replacement mode, even if you were to go with the current version of the same solution from your existing vendor, because data architecture has changed in addition to capabilities. And and Jim's going to talk about this in a few minutes, but upgrades can certainly be every bit as painful as a replacement if you've waited too long. And the other thing is, over time, this number is actually getting lower in terms of how many years before your application is obsolete and potentially inhibiting your operational ability to meet customer and internal expectations, largely driven by the introduction of automation. If you look at one of those reports that says, hey, what are your top supply chain initiatives for the next 2 years? Automation tends to always be very near the top. And surprisingly enough, WMS and LMS tend to be near the bottom. But it's really a mistake to think about one without thinking about the other, right? The automation isn't going to solve all your problems. It may reduce your FTE headcount in whatever function where you install robotics. It may optimize the performance of that function, but you haven't maximized the value of that facility. You haven't necessarily deferred the investment in additional square feet that you may need if you don't optimize the total throughput of the operation. And certainly the capabilities, the base capabilities that are coming along in the WMS and LMS solutions, you need to be on the current version to take advantage of those capabilities, especially if you're looking at automation. So the strategy of the vendors to move to the cloud, to make their solutions active, is becoming more and more common and prevalent, and I think something important for people to take a hold of, because your requirements are going to continue to evolve as we go forward. And that's that bullet. You go ahead and load the next one, Jim. So in addition to all the operational challenges, the other problem with obsolete software is your ability to be compliant with your IT strategy requirements, right? Is your network strategy there? Is your security requirements there? Are you able to achieve whatever third-party compliance is important to your organization, whether it's, SOC 2 or ISO something or what have you? An on-prem field deployed solution is much more likely to run into challenges in the eyes of your CIO than an IT solution that's being administered and managed directly by the IT organization. So, and if the broader organization is seeking to migrate to the cloud or enhance their security standards, et cetera, to protect customer and employee data, the older WMS and LMS could be an impediment to that. And then the last bullet on this slide
A
is
quick
talking all
question
about.
for you.
Yeah.
To pipe in is, how do you calculate goal time in an ELS for a specific pick assignment in real time, especially accounting for unanticipated operations like pick shorts, congestion, et cetera?
Yeah. So in the LMS, they're utilizing heel to toe logic as it relates to task assignment till task completion. And if they run into an exception process and exit out of that task for whatever reason, there's an ability to log and have your supervisor approve some sort of delay time. So that we can know the difference between somebody who came back late from break versus somebody whose forklift went dead and they had to go get a new battery, right? You know, one of those is perfectly acceptable. The other one was somebody hid somewhere in an 800,000 square foot facility to call somebody on their cell phone. So we track all of the work activities heel to toe. And then when there is an exception to the performance relative to the standard, it's up to that supervisor to chat with that associate and understand whether or not some delay time should be accounted for. If that answers your question. And then just to wrap up on this slide, right? So we talked about labor being 60%, but obviously the costs associated with maintaining these older systems can be relatively high. And a lot of our customers, whether you're a 3PL or a manufacturer or a wholesaler or a retailer or what have you, you really don't want to be a software company. And, utilizing a best-in-class solution from one of the software first providers out there and making sure that it's, commercially viable, integrated with your solution strategy is going to lead to a lower cost of ownership, not only operationally, but from an IT standpoint as well. So examining the total cost of ownership of your legacy solution and then comparing that to the anticipated cost of ownership of up-to-date application strategy should be part of the ROI analysis that you consider, and certainly the sort of thing that Alpine can help with. But Jim, what do you want to add?
On this slide, typically we see that clients utilize about 10% of the features and functionalities within a WMS. And so one of the things that clients should do is understand that this is a journey. So when you go live with a new system, you're going to set it up, you're going to get it going, but always be thinking of, okay, what is underneath the hood that's going to allow us to continue to improve our consistency, our accuracy, our productivity. And then finally, when it comes to this, I know this is a beaten drum, but we still have to fight it, is change your processes, don't customize your WMS. It ends up being a trap for you, and by enhancing and upgrading to a new WMS, you're allowing yourself to make improvements versus just doing a lift and shift.
Yeah, it's a great idea to participate in the user conference of your WMS or LMS vendor, to network with their other customers, understand who's using a different version, a newer version than you are. Why has that been valuable to them? So that you can kind of see through the marketing, and the messaging being provided solely by the vendor, networking with their other users in that kind of a forum. In addition to learning from the vendor what's going on with their company and their products, you can gain the insights from what's going on with their other customers. With that, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next several slides.
All right, thanks, John. So time to replace or upgrade. This is a list of questions where you can kind of assess your own operation. And if you're answering these in a manner where it says, yeah, we really aren't able to, in a real-time manner, understand the state of our operations, it may be time for replacing or upgrading your WMS. So stakeholders outside the facility cannot answer their own questions on inventory status or customer orders. The people that are doing sales or customer service should not have to call into the warehouse to understand the state of a given order. All stakeholders should have real-time access to whether it's WMS or LMS information We shouldn't be getting emails to the warehouse to check on orders or statuses. So that would be a red flag if you're currently having to do that within your operation. Are your applications aligned with the corporate IT strategy and security requirements? A lot has changed, as we know, with cyber security over the years. This is front and center regardless of how large or small your operation is. Are you dealing with too many exceptions to normal operational processes? Do you have tribal knowledge that is tied to how you run your business? If so, that may be an indication that you need a system that is going to drive consistency, drive performance, drive accuracy. Is response time slow, making your labor pool efficient? Once again, we get back to performance, productivity, but also happy employees. If they can't do their job and they're waiting on the system or they're running into obstacles, that's not good for your workforce. Are your employees expert with your technology? Are they dealing with a GUI screen, something that's technologically advanced, or is it a green screen or even an orange screen? Does it take too long to get new reports, queries, or enhancements? Are you dependent on your IT team for this type of support? Do you have a lot of ad hoc reports? The answer is yes. It may be time to, understand what's out there in the system world that exists today. Are you missing savings due to inefficient operations with evolving requirements? John mentioned, intelligent cross-docking, system-directed put away, replenishment, all sorts of things that the new WMSs and new systems are continually improving upon. And especially if you're dealing with a homegrown WMS, it's almost impossible to keep up with the pace of change. And then finally, are you investing in new advanced automation or robotics now or in the future? Or are you being held back from doing those things because of the current system that you're utilizing? All right, so selecting the right WMS and LMS. So if you've identified the need for change, you also then want to understand, well, what is the right WMS and LMS solution for me? So it's important for you to know your operational and technical requirements with a focus on those unique to your operations. And when we say that unique to your operations, it's key to do that self-assessment and even have outside people do that assessment to say, how special really are our operations? Because in my 30 plus years in consulting and working in the 3PL industry, we find that 90% of all verticals and all operations are doing the same thing: receiving, putting away, picking, packing, and shipping. There are very few things that are truly specific, and those are the things that you want to, uncover and determine within your operation. Understand the vendor's experience in your space. So if you are in food, e-commerce, healthcare, pharma, understand the experience of the vendors that are in your short list. Evaluate the total cost of ownership, purchasing versus licensing. Are we in the cloud? Are we on-prem? What's the implementation and the ongoing support required for setting up and maintaining your system? Knowing the resources that will be staffed on your program. So it's one thing to go through the whole sales cycle, but you want to meet the people that will actually be on the implementation team. Will you be dealing with the seasoned veterans, the gray-haired, follically challenged type of people, or will it be a junior resource? These are all very important to vet when you're going through the WMS and LMS selection process. Visit the customers, learn from their experiences, go see the systems in action. Nothing can substitute actually seeing the system live and also getting that real feedback from the folks that have gone through the actual implementations and the learnings with these systems and the partnerships with the vendors. And then finally, leverage the expertise of third-party consultants who specialize in WMS and LMS. You may have the experience and understanding of your business, but tap into the experience of people that have seen a lot of different things and can help navigate you through this whole process. One of the things that we do at Alpine is we actually do system selections for our partners. And what we kind of tell people is, we're going to show you what you need. So you might want a McLaren automobile, but if a sedan will do, that's something that, you want to make sure that you understand, and that, you're not going out and purchasing something expensive with a lot of bells and whistles if it's not right for your operation. John, I got to turn it over to you for any additional comments on this particular slide.
I think the one thing I would call out is your fourth bullet there about knowing the resources, who's going to be the project manager, and knowing who your own resources are going to be. And are their personalities going to be compatible? Is the experience that they bring to the table going to fill in the gaps that you might be missing from a client side? Are the vendor and your team, both IT and operations, and a third-party consultant, if you're using them, are they all going to play well together? That's probably the difference between a successful and a less than fully successful implementation, is the dynamic of the delivery team itself and the experience of that delivery team. So, the same software vendor selling the same piece of software has projects that are gloriously successful and others that wind up in litigation. And yet it's the same software. So it's not the software that's at fault. It's the methodology and the resources that were utilized to deliver that program and bring it to fruition for that customer. So you can't underestimate how important the resource question is. The amount of change management work that's required to do either a WMS or LMS is substantial. And, the facility that you target as your first site, understanding their ability to adopt new technology and to change is going to be real important. I've found that, quite honestly, the newer the building is to the customer's network, the easier the WMS and LMS project is. That the 20 or 30-year-old building that has associates in it that have been there since the day it opened is going to be harder than your brand new West Coast facility that you're just standing up. So making sure that that first site is a big win will help sell it to the additional sites, whether you're talking about a labor program or a warehousing program.
Question for you two is, where is this beneficial? I've tried to get my clients to implement ELS, LMS systems to not much success. Sometimes it's because of cost. Most of the time it's due to the time and effort on their end to install and configure them. How do you overcome this objection? So
you're right, especially at the supervisor level, there's an initial reaction. If we haven't created a sense of ownership during the configuration, build, integration phases prior to go live, in a post-go live world, that's where the most resistance comes from, because they initially feel like it's more work than they used to have. But if they're along for the ride as a stakeholder from the very beginning, they understand that the standards that are being developed are in fact fair and representative of the work that should be able to be completed by the average associate. And the right communication strategy has been in place to sell people on the cultural transformation that's taking place. You've got the right executive sponsorship and accountability there from the executive, whether it's the facility director or corporate supply chain folks. I mean, they need to be the champions of this program. That in that first 4 to 6 weeks of production system utilization, the epiphany will occur to the supervisors that while they're doing different things than they used to do because they have to go get out of their chair and go spend more time on the floor doing observations and coaching with their hourly associates, they'll find that it saves them time trying to solve all the problems that they've had to solve traditionally. So there is hand holding to be done from a change management standpoint, both pre-go live and post-go live. And that's where, you need to take advantage of the services, both of that, consulting firm as well as the software provider. And, don't let them just get away with being responsible for the configuration of their tool. Make them accountable for validating the engineered standards if you're talking to the LMS vendor. Make them accountable for the testing program if you're talking to the consultant and the WMS vendor about the WMS program. So having that shared accountability with the right stakeholders and communication strategy is probably the key.
And I think that just to add to that, taking a strategic view versus a tactical view is very critical. So having the sponsorship, like John mentioned, communicating the benefits, having a vision that is shared early and often about where we are going and how this is a new way of running our business.
So Jim, go to your next slide with the pitfalls, because I think it addresses a lot of this.
I was just going to say that this was a good question segue into the next slide, which is these are the things that can derail the success of these type of projects. If you want to do a lift and shift, why invest in a new WMS or an LMS if you're going to operate in a new environment exactly the way you were before? Taking that tactical rather than strategic approach. Tactical is important. You want to make sure you get the nuts and bolts right, but you always got to be beating the drum on the strategic point of it. And if you are a network of facilities with a corporate center, if you will, having that be a corporate-led directive about, hey, this is how we're going to run our network of facilities is very important. Having your top leaders be visible during these rollouts, beginning, middle, and before, after, cannot be underestimated. Having the WMS seen as an IT project definitely can lead to failure. This has to be seen as the owners are the ones embracing it. They're the ones driving the change. IT should be an enabler. Same thing on the LMS side. That's a people project, a change management project, a culture of accountability project. Engineering is an enabler. Under communicating. The 7X rule is one that you should always think about. You have to say something to someone 7 times, it's said, before it really sinks in. So don't think that you can say, well, we had that meeting, remember 3 months ago? Early, often, keep the communication going and understand that it takes different people, different times to absorb the change and the messaging. No executive sponsorship. We went in, we had some engineers, we forced it on operations. There wasn't anyone kind of talking about why we're doing this. Recipe for disaster. Lack of investment in change management. These are people projects more than anything. The technology, the systems, those are enablers. I often say that the labor management system is just a big calculator. But it's the program that you wrap around it that is really going to drive the benefit and the positive change.
One thing I'd add just real quick, and David, it's a follow-up to your earlier question, is think about when is a crawl, walk, run approach appropriate as opposed to a big bang? And whether you're talking about a single site or a network of facilities, be thoughtful about how much you implement and how quickly you implement it so that you can make sure you have an early win that you can then use to help sell the program more broadly. So in my world of LMS, I may not choose to turn on standards for 100% of the activities in the operation on day one. I may not even choose to turn them on for 50% of the operations in the facility in day one, right? I may only want to do the highest production activities related to outbound processing at first. And then I'll add in put away, or, some inbound processes. And there's a certain percentage of functions within that distribution center that may be clerical or yard or indirect labor or automation integration. There are certain roles that are not well lent to traditional engineered standards models that may never, be addressed with that type of a solution strategy. We may use other ways of capturing productivity for those associates through the tool, but it's going to be a different approach. And those may be ones that I double back and pick up in phase 2 or phase 3, as I prove it out. And then, of course, I already talked about, in a multi-facility network, be thoughtful about what building you go into first, based on, knowing who the people are in that operation and their ability to absorb change.
So the synergies, the way you can look at it is, the WMS is an enabler. With the features, functionalities, you're going to gain a lift through the technology. Efficient processes that focus on safety, consistency, accuracy, and productivity. And then an LMS that is there to enable a culture of accountability and continual improvement. And when you look at an LMS, and I want to touch on this specifically, when you get the greatest amount of success with an LMS, or I should say an LMP, labor management program, it's when it is viewed as no different than receiving and shipping cases within your facility. Receiving and shipping cases is something you would never see as optional. In order to support your customers, you do that on a daily basis, and you follow a certain set of procedures and processes. Same thing with the LMS. If you do that correctly and look at it as mission critical, savings of upwards of 20% versus your current spend are definitely achievable. And that kind of number gets noticed. So success stories. John and I wanted to end with some more stories that really just drive the importance of the WMS and the LMS. So inventory accuracy, the newer systems during the pick process, you can have pictures of items so that it limits the mistakes or the mispicks. You can have countbacks so that if you're picking certain items that are of more value, or if you have newer employees where you are worried about their accuracy, you can put processes in place where it's tailored to different work employee categories. You can do rules by status where you're looking at seasoned veterans, trainees, or like I mentioned, those items. So that can be a real benefit when it comes to inventory accuracy. Roundtable meetings. I've done this a lot in my career, where I go to facilities where the employees have concerns or they're worried about their standing within the facility. And I go in and I say, all right, who am I going to be meeting with? And they'll tell me the names, and I'll run reports before I get to the meeting. And I come in there, we sit in the lunchroom and we're talking. And in one case, a gentleman said, Jim, I don't understand why I'm struggling to meet the performance targets within the labor management program. And I said, well, what's your name? And he goes, well, I'm Bill. I'm like, all right, Bill, here's what I'm seeing. Your first assignment is your lowest performance. Your second lowest is the one around break. You've also got low performance around lunch and then at the end of the shift. And what I'm seeing is that what it means is you're probably taking too long to get started. Maybe you're talking about the football game from the previous night. Around breaks and lunches, maybe you're taking 20 minutes versus 15. And around lunch, it's turning into a 40-minute lunch as versus a 30. And then you're shutting it down early on the back end. He looked at me and said, you know what, I never even thought about that. And I said, yeah, when I look at your performance, all of your assignments, your meeting goal and even exceeding it, it's on these 4 assignments where you're falling off. So roundtable meetings can be very beneficial. And having a labor management program allows you to share that information with employees. Quick wins. When you're first turning on the system, there are a lot of quick wins out there. The one that I just mentioned about the beginning of shift, end of shift, that's a great example. Another one would be, I've rolled these out and people said, you know, Jim, at the beginning of the shift, we spend 10 to 30 minutes trying to find the equipment that we need in order to start our day and do our shifts. And we said, all right, well, if we can figure this out, maybe this will help you. So we just painted stalls where they could park their material handling equipment. We numbered every stall, we numbered every piece of equipment. We solved that for them. No one had to work harder at the beginning and end of shift. It was more organized. Also, an example would be supplies at workstations. Employees are not able to be productive because they didn't have supplies. We created a job function where one person was responsible for making sure that all the supplies were at the workstations. Another one, cost to serve. Within your facility, you've got maybe each pick, case pick, pallet pick, layer pick, what have you. Cost to serve can show you ordering patterns by customers. And sometimes we'll see a customer is ordering 80 of a given item when 100 is a full pallet. So understanding those breaks and how those quantities can actually lead to higher or lower dollars to actually fulfill orders are things that can be pulled from a labor management system. So I'm going to turn it over to John for a handful of other examples.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim, build out all, there are two more, build them both up there, because they're kind of all related and we've touched on them a lot, right? The success story, that really resonates with me is, employee engagement, right? It used to be, right? 20, 30 years ago, when you were buying an LMS, it was about a whip and a chair. Today, it's about, a productive, happy workforce where I'm not having to rely on labor. I'm not having 20% turnover per year, et cetera. So the success stories are a lot about young workforces who like to work with automation, who feel valued in the work that they're doing. They feel like they're gaining skills. They're happy to work there. They feel fairly measured and fairly compensated. So it creates that culture of continuous improvement and resolves some of those issues related to the relationships as you span the levels of the organization. So these three are pretty much tied together. I think for any, end client or customer out there, you need to think about where you're starting from, where you're going to, what does the roadmap look like to get you there? So, because your success story is going to be unique, and you need to make sure that you plot out that course, in a way that's going to allow you to achieve that success. Jim mentioned that Alpine does an assessment of a facility. That's a great place to start. Where are you now? What's the opportunity in front of you? What's the best way to go after that opportunity, both systemically, operationally, inventory channel flow strategy, facility design, any of those considerations that they can look at holistically to figure out how to optimize your operation and drive success.
All right. We did the Q&A during it. We're almost running up against it, but Dave, if you want to show the poll results, we'll run over those real quickly and then we'll wrap today's webinar up. All right, so how old is your WMS? We see, it looks like, wow, three-way tie between 4 to 7, more than 7, and we do not have a WMS. That's very interesting. How old is your LMS? 1 to 3 years, or we do not have an LMS. All right. John and I are definitely available to talk after this call with those of you that do not have a LMS or a WMS. And then how mature is your labor management solution? Robust, 29%, or the highest one, we monitor our labor performance without an LMS. Very interesting. All
Yes.
right. Go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to add, one of the things to assess is, for example, in the world of LMS, when should you be adding an LMS to your equation, right? What's the complexity of your operation? What's your FTE count? What's the value? There is absolutely an assessment to be done to understand when do you transition from trying to track productivity manually to a more mature, robust LMS solution. And, that's an assessment that either of us can help with if you've got questions related to that after that. But no, thanks everybody for your time.
Yep. And our next webinar, October 18th, at 1 p.m. and it's our continuing theme with the music. Barcode U, how to use barcode technology to create network consistency. Thank you, everybody. It's 3 o'clock. We appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact Alpine or TZA. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.